Anyway, let's talk about the Moonkin situation, which, by the way, I think is already a problem on live servers, not only on Alpha. But I think on Alpha, the problem was kind of more noticeable because people assumed that the issues that we have right now in Shadowlands are going to be fixed with the talent system that we get in Dragonflight. And it turns out that the issues that we have right now in Shadowlands are not fixed during Alpha. Not fixed with the talents. Now, usually I would say, oh, it's just Alpha and things can still change and all of that. And that's obviously true. But I think Moonkin is a little bit in a specific situation where the problem is not necessarily the talents themselves, but the problem is like the base kit. And we cannot properly look at the talents if the base kit is broken, quote unquote. So that's why I'm talking about this right now, because I think Moonkin needs specific changes to the baseline kit, or the issues need to be addressed otherwise for the rest of the talents to be able to be judged properly and tested properly. So that's why I'm going over this post that Tettles made on the Druid forum, which reflects a lot of the opinions that the Moonkins have in general. And I'm gonna give my thoughts to it as well. So at the top he put a TLDR, and I think the TLDR already has a lot of the main issues. Number 1, Starfall and our AoE in general needs some changing desperately. We should not be limited to one Starfall when it is our spender. Our only spender. Now, I think this is by far the most important thing. And I honestly think the rest of the problems might somewhat already be resolved if this gets fixed. Now, I've been talking about this for a long time already. Throughout Shadowlands, honestly, I've been talking about this. And it's the fact that Starfall does not stack with the current iteration. And if you have Stellar Drift, it even has a cooldown. Now, that is generally not the issue, but the issue is that Starfall is our only Astral power spender on AoE. And obviously that creates a problem where you are on, like, there's like 20 mobs in front of you, you have Starfall up already, and then there's nothing else you can really do with your Astral power that makes sense. Or feels good, for that matter. The only other spender that we have is Star Search, which is of course a single target spender, and it obviously just does not feel good to press Star Search when there's multiple mobs in front of you, and it only damages one target. Now, some people might say, oh, but Star Search has an implemented way of buffing our AoE through Starfire, right? Because if you press Star Search in Lunar Eclipse, then your Starfire does more splash damage, technically, right? The thing is, though, that that is a very weak buff, and we have an Eclipse system, so that means we're only in Lunar Eclipse that much of our whole fight, right? We are 15 seconds in Solar Eclipse, then there's time outside of Eclipse, and then we're 15 seconds in Lunar Eclipse. And we only have that AoE damage in Lunar Eclipse, so it's a very short amount of time that we actually spent in that AoE phase. And additionally, our Starfire is not very strong, or the splash damage of it is not very strong. And even if it would be stronger, it still wouldn't feel so good because it's a filler and not a spender. Starfire is a filler ability that gives us Astral power. So obviously it's not going to be as strong, because it shouldn't be buffed into like an infinite amount to actually make it good on AoE, because it's not supposed to be so good as a filler, like as a generator of Astral power, right? So that creates the issue where, okay, our AoE spender is Starfall, and our single target spender is Star Surge, buffing our Starfire, but Starfire is whatever, right? So what we need is Starfall to somehow interact with other spenders somehow, or we need an additional ability that lets us spend Astral power on AoE, or Starfall needs to be able to be stacked somehow, right? I think that is like the main playstyle problem that most Moonkins are just not happy with at the moment, in Shadowlands and in Alpha, because it just feels really bad. And I'm not asking for Moonkin to be buffed or anything, I'm literally just asking for the class to feel good whenever there's an AoE situation, because right now it really just doesn't feel good to only have Starfall and nothing else really, right? Now there's multiple ways of how you can fix this. I already said some of those fixes, right? Number 1, you could make Starfall stack, right? There is an issue with starfall stacking though, and it's the fact that starfall has such a huge radius, and it's of course incredibly good on spread out targets, and there aren't many other classes in the game that can do damage on spread out targets. So it makes sense that starfall is a bit weaker compared to other AoEs, because starfall has such a huge radius, and that's okay, right? I'm not saying that it should be even stronger on spread out targets. Now, the problem though is that, of course, a lot of the AoE that we do is stacked AoE, right? Like M+ or whatever, all the mobs are stacked up. And then our starfall in a stacked situation is very underwhelming compared to other classes' AoE spells. And the way to fix that would be multiple ways. You can make starfall do some sort of splash damage when the ads are stacked, so it's stronger on stacked but weaker on spread AoE. You could make Star Surge do something extra if Starfall is already up, right? So if Starfall is already running, your Star Surge could do splash damage, for example. So you still press Starfall on cooldown, but then when it's up, you still have Star Surge to spend to do splash damage on stacked situations. So that would again buff our AoE on a stacked situation, but not buff our AoE on a spread situation. Then additionally, we could get another AoE spender, just like a completely different ability. For example, it could be Fury of a Loon. Fury of a Loon is an Astral Power generator right now. It's a beam that you cast on a target, and it gives us Astral Power. Technically, they could rework that spell to cost Astral Power instead of giving us Astral Power, so we can use it as another spender, right? That's also a possibility. Then there's still many other possibilities on how to fix this. They could say Starfall stacks, but guess like a diminishing kind of effect on spread out targets somehow, right? They could also make our dots somehow do more damage if targets are stacked, if Starfall is running, and then you let it, like, make it possible to stack Starfalls as well, so you can stack this damage, but it wouldn't be so strong on spread out targets because we don't have a good way of applying dots on spread out targets. Right, so there's like multiple ways on how this could be addressed. They just need to pick one of those solutions and apply it, in my opinion, to be able to fix this. Balancing is another like thing. I don't think Moonkin necessarily has to be like super strong on stacked AoE. I just think it needs to have something to be able to do stacked damage, right? Then the next main issue that I want to talk about is the second point that Tettles is making here. Astral Power generation on AoE is far too low. With T29 it is fine, but from a base kit perspective it is problematic. So yeah, our general Astral Power generation was already really low throughout the Shadowlands until we got tier 29. Before that it was already really bad, and people definitely noticed, especially on AoE situations, that you're spending a lot of time casting fillers, which again is generally not too big of an issue, but it becomes a problem when you have so many other things that you have to cast as well as a Moonkin to like ramp up your damage, right? You have dots that you need to apply, you have Starfall that you need to cast, you need to enter eclipses, and then if in addition you also just don't generate a lot of Astral Power and you need to sit there casting fillers, it takes so long for you to be able to cast the fillers in the first place because you need to do so many other things beforehand. So we need more like passive Astral Power generation, especially when there's more targets, because that's the situation where it feels the worst. On single target, of course, it's not that big of a problem that we cast a lot of fillers, because on single target we don't have to do that many things to ramp up our damage. On single target we only have to apply Moonfire, Sunfire, and then we can do our thing, right? On AoE, it's different. On AoE we need to dot, which is a lot of globals, right, if you want to apply Moonfire to everything, and then do other things as well. And therefore on AoE it just feels a lot worse that you're stuck with only filler cast Astral Power generation, right? So there are some talents in Alpha that give us more Astral Power generation, but I tested some of the talents and none of them seem like satisfying enough or good enough to compensate the lack of Astral Power generation. And additionally, you have to give up other powers to gain the Astral Power generation, right? And you could always say, oh, it's a trade-off. You go with more Astral Power generator talents, but in return you give up more damage. But then the problem is we gain more astral power generation, but then we can't actually do anything really good with our astral power on AoE, and therefore it makes no sense for us to go with astral power generation, right? If we would have an additional way of doing stacked up AoE damage somehow, or we would have an additional spender for our AoE, then it would make sense for us to go with more astral power generators, and then it might feel better. But yeah, right now it feels bad. It feels like we have no astral power, and even if we have astral power, we can't do anything with it, and that combination just feels horrible. Again, especially on AoE, because on single target or in like 2 targets or whatever, it's fine because we don't need to spend so much time applying our dots and everything, right? But yeah, applying all of your dots and then not generating any astral power during that time frame just feels horrible. It feels like we have the longest ramp up time ever. And then once we finally get a starfall down, the mobs are half dead already. And then what do we do? Like, it just feels really bad from a playstyle perspective. And then the next point is just like the same thing as I just talked about. Dots still suck to press on AoE. This could be alleviated by tuning up shooting stars to old levels. Now, shooting stars, I do think, could technically be a problem if it scales too highly, because shooting stars, of course, was changed and has now a diminishing return, which I think was added to stop the like infinite scaling issue, because there are some classes that whenever they get infinite scaling, they become really overpowered. A very good example for this is Destro Warlock. Destro Warlock has this kind of scaling that the more targets there are, the like more like shards and like generators you get. And not just like additive, but like multiplicative. And that is the issue, right? And I think shooting stars might have a very similar problem if it doesn't have a diminishing return. I think it was pretty obvious at the end of Legion that we generated so much astral power on huge pulls that we would just spam Starfall on GCD, kind of like Destro Warlock spams Ring of Fire on GCD at the moment on live servers. And I think that's the issue with shooting stars. That's why they changed it. But I do think it's too weak at the moment. And I think that DR that they added should be, like, I'm not saying they should completely remove the DR, but I'm saying it should be buffed a little bit. Because right now, shooting stars might as well just not exist in terms of astral power generation, because you can barely feel the astral power being added whenever there's more mobs, right? So I do think shooting stars shouldn't be like super OP and give you like 1 million astral power when there's 50 mobs. But at the same time, I do think shooting stars should be noticeable and actually give you more astral power on AoE, right? Like, I think if there's 5-6 mobs that have dots on them, you should definitely notice the increase in astral power generation, right? So, and right now you don't. So that's something that should be addressed. And then again, diminishing returns feel oppressive on a few abilities like Fear of Balloon and Shooting Stars. I already mentioned this now. And then the talent tree could use some node movement. Now, I don't want to actually go into the talent tree at all. And the reason why is because I think that the AoE issue and the astral power issue are like a base problem that Moonkin has right now that I'm not really sure can be perfectly addressed with the current talents that we have. In fact, I know it can't, right? There's just no talents that fix these problems. I think that this has to be addressed first, and then afterwards we can reevaluate the talent tree, because right now, the talent tree just makes, like, I think the talent tree is bad, the way it is right now, but mainly because of this issue. So therefore, it's like really hard for me to talk about the talent tree in a good way, because I think that without addressing these two issues with our AoE and our astral power generation, I don't think that a talent tree makes sense to even like discuss and give feedback on. And that's why I'm not gonna talk about it at all. There's definitely some things with the talent tree I could mention, and it's basically certain talents having a position that makes no sense. Like, for example, there's Starfall, which clearly is AoE on the left, and then that talent leads into a single target choice, which I don't think is very good, right? Because most classes have their AoE and their single target kind of divided, which makes sense. And in our talent tree, it feels like we have some AoE on one side into single target, and then we have some single target on the other side into some AoE, which I don't think makes very much sense, right? But then at the same time, depending on how they address the starfall issue, if at all, I think this could be solved, right? Because for example, as I mentioned earlier, this could be fixed if Star Surge would have splash damage whenever starfall is up. And then I think that some of the talent positions would make a lot more sense than what they do now, right? So if that's a solution that Blizzard chooses to go with, then I think that the talents might make even sense how they are right now, right? For example, the position of where OI is. Like here, we have Dreambinder and OI on its intuition. And right now it leads into it through Starfall. So you have Starfall into the Blessings, into OI and Dreambinder. And I think those two talents are very heavily single target at the moment. Like very heavily single target. But if they would change the issue that we have with the AoE by, as I said, making Star Surge do splash damage whenever Starfall is up, then all of a sudden these talents might not actually be that bad anymore. Right? Because then you, for example, Dreambinder would all of a sudden have a completely different value for AoE. Because then you would cast Starfall, you already get one Dreambinder stack, and then you cast Star Surge because it's a splash damage, and you stack up your Dreambinder, and it would actually be a damage gain on AoE, right? So that's why I think that it's really, really hard to just give any sort of feedback on these talents without having our base issue resolved in some way. So yeah. That's all I have to say. Fix Starfall, or fix AoE in general, and fix Astral Power Generation. And then we can look at the rest of the talents.